They spray-painted violation across Hank Delaney's spotless driveway without warning. The HOA enforcers acted like untouchable tyrants, handing out fines and threats with smug grins. But Hank had a hidden advantage. He helped design the neighborhood's zoning code. Just wait until you see how he turned their own rules against them, and why justice hit back harder than they ever saw coming. On a quiet Tuesday morning in suburban Georgia, Hank Delaney stood at his kitchen sink, sipping the same black coffee he'd made for 40 years. Through the bay window, he could see the end of his driveway, framed by neatly trimmed hedges, and the American flag swaying from the post by his garage. Everything looked just like it had since he retired 5 years ago. Clean, orderly, earned. That's why what happened next didn't just surprise him, it stunned him. A white golf cart with HOA logos on the sides coasted slowly down his street. It stopped abruptly at the end of Hank's driveway. 2 men hopped out, both wearing matching tucked-in polos and name tags. They didn't make eye contact. They didn't ring the bell. They didn't even pause. One of them, a lean guy with aviators and the air of someone who really liked clipboards, uncapped a spray can and bent down. With a swift motion, he scrawled the word violation in giant block letters right across the center of Hank's driveway. Bright orange paint. Sloppy. Permanent. The other pulled out a phone, snapped a photo, then turned to the clipboard and mumbled, "Unapproved surface modification. It's documented. He'll get a letter." Hank blinked, still holding his coffee, unsure if he was watching some sort of bizarre prank. The 2 enforcers hopped back into the cart and drove off, the electric motor whirring faintly. No explanation, no knock, no warning. Hank stepped outside in his slippers, still gripping his mug. He stared at the graffiti on his driveway, like it was from another world. The smooth concrete he'd poured 15 years ago, maintained, sealed, perfectly level, was now branded like some kind of criminal evidence. What the hell just happened?" Denise called out from the porch. She had come out wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression frozen between confusion and alarm. "They said I modified the surface," Hank muttered, barely believing his own words. "I haven't touched it in a decade." The next 2 hours were a blur. Hank tried calling the HOA hotline. No answer. He dug through old compliance letters. Nothing. Finally, through a neighbor who had connections on the board, he learned the truth. The HOA had held a closed executive session last month. In it, they passed a new aesthetic uniformity resolution requiring all driveways to be redone in decorative pavers. There had been no newsletter, no homeowner vote, no chance to appeal. And because Hank's driveway, the same one that had passed inspection every year, was now considered non-conforming, they had labeled it a violation without notice. Denise stood beside him in silence as they looked down at the fluorescent paint drying under the Georgia sun. "This can't be legal," she said quietly. Hank didn't answer, but behind his calm eyes, something old and sharp began to stir. Not rage, not yet, just a cold, calculating clarity. The kind a man gets when someone picks a fight they don't know they've already lost. By midweek, the paint still hadn't faded, not even a little. Hank had tried everything, acetone, power washing, even calling in a contractor he trusted from his years working municipal projects. The verdict was the same from all sides. The HOA's cheap hardware store spray paint had bonded into the surface sealant. Removal would leave the driveway permanently stained and uneven. The only solution, as the HOA coldly reminded him in an official notice, was to replace the entire driveway. With permeable pavers, of course. Approved by the HOA, they emphasized. At Hank's expense. Cost estimate, just over $12,000. He called the HOA office and asked for a hearing, a chance to appeal, to reason with someone. The receptionist placed him on hold for 11 minutes, only to return and inform him that a $250 fine had already been assessed for obstruction of compliance. Apparently, requesting an appeal counted as interference now. When Hank sent a formal written complaint to the board, citing his long-standing record of compliance, the HOA's response was a warning. Continued resistance could result in a lien being placed against his property. "I built this house," Hank told Denise that evening. I helped design this whole subdivision stormwater system. That driveway was approved by the city, and it's still in perfect working order." She believed him. The city had signed off on that concrete slab back when the soil engineers had to balance runoff flow with groundwater retention. Hank had the plans, the data, the permits. What he didn't have was a say in any of the new rules, because the HOA had passed them behind closed doors, with no homeowner vote, no survey, no disclosure. It wasn't about infrastructure or code, it was about control. He went to the next board meeting. The room was packed, mostly with residents there to ask about unrelated items: mailbox theft, pool hours, dog leash signs. Hank waited patiently for the public comment period. When his turn came, he stood, introduced himself clearly, and began laying out the technical conflict between the new HOA rules and the original city-approved plans. Exactly 30 seconds into his speech, the board president raised her hand and said, "Sir, your time is up." "I haven't even," Hank began, but his mic was cut. "That's the end of comment period," another board member chimed in. "This isn't the forum for complaints." He stood there in silence as they moved on to the next item. Not a single person acknowledged him. Later that week, Hank confronted one of the same enforcers who had vandalized his driveway. It happened near the communal mailbox cluster, under the afternoon sun. The man leaned casually against the cart, sipping from a stainless steel thermos. "Enjoying the power trip?" Hank asked, calm but firm. The man smirked and adjusted his aviators. "Can't beat the system, sir. Unless you are the system." That moment stayed with Hank, not because of the arrogance, but because of the truth hiding underneath it. That night, sleep didn't come. He stayed at his desk with a yellow legal pad, reviewing binders he hadn't opened in years. Engineering schematics, planning memos, correspondence from the city's zoning department. Then, in the back of his old filing cabinet, he found what he was looking for. A dusty folder labeled Zoning Code, Phase 2, Plans. Inside was every original infrastructure drawing, city approval document, and runoff compliance chart he had signed off on 2 decades earlier, when the neighborhood was still dirt roads and survey stakes. He didn't say a word, just reached for his phone and opened his contact list. It was time to talk to some old friends, people who actually wrote the rules. By Friday morning, Hank Delaney's kitchen table didn't look like a retired man's breakfast nook. It looked like a war room. Folders, municipal maps, color-coded zoning overlays, and 3-ring binders filled with original engineering documents were stacked in rows. At the center sat a thick red file stamped Subdivision Development Agreement, City of Brookdale Vertical Bar, Phase 2. He hadn't just found a mistake in the HOA's policy. He had uncovered a direct violation of city law. The agreement, signed 2 decades ago, required that all driveways in the development be made of poured concrete, a decision made for critical flood mitigation and groundwater control. Hank had written part of that drainage plan himself. Decorative pavers, the kind the HOA now demanded, weren't just non-compliant. They actively interfered with stormwater dispersal during heavy rains. Worse still, the HOA hadn't filed any updated plans with the city before enforcing their new architectural compliance rule. They'd gone rogue. And Hank wasn't just any homeowner. He was a retired municipal engineer with 3 decades of professional credibility, and a contact list filled with first-name connections to the people who still worked inside City Hall. He made 5 phone calls. By Monday morning, Hank had submitted a formal complaint to the City of Brookdale's Zoning Compliance Office, complete with annotated diagrams, side-by-side comparison photos, and a written affidavit detailing the discrepancies between the HOA's new rules and the city's binding code. 3 days later, a city code inspector showed up, unannounced, at the HOA president's front door. In his hand was a cease and desist order, signed by the zoning board and backed by municipal authority. All enforcement related to driveway violations was to stop immediately pending a full investigation. But Hank wasn't finished. The following week, he signed up to speak at the Brookdale City Council meeting. No one knew what to expect when the quiet man in a pressed button-down took the podium with a USB stick and a laser pointer. But within 60 seconds, the room had fallen silent. Hank presented a slideshow. First, wide shots of driveways spray-painted with the word violation in neon orange. Then, a series of official letters demanding $12,000 from homeowners for non-compliant surfaces. Next, a map overlay showing original drainage zones directly at odds with the HOA's unauthorized paver policy. And finally, a single photograph that made the chamber shift in their seats. The HOA's white compliance golf cart parked directly across a disabled veteran's access ramp, blocking it completely. Hank let the silence stretch before he spoke again. This isn't about aesthetics, it's about power, and whether power is being used legally or abusively. There were no outbursts, no grandstanding, just quiet authority and evidence too damning to ignore. When he stepped down, the mayor himself shook Hank's hand, and for the first time in weeks, Hank didn't feel anger tightening his chest. He felt momentum. When the city's ruling came down, it didn't come quietly. It came with weight, finality, and a very public memo posted both online and at the HOA's own clubhouse bulletin board. The verdict was clear. The HOA board had acted outside its authority in direct violation of the subdivision's original development agreement, city code, and municipal engineering standards. Every citation related to driveway non-compliance was declared null and void. But it didn't stop there. The city ordered the HOA to fully cover the cost of repaving every driveway that had been defaced with violation markings, using city-approved materials and licensed contractors. No shortcuts, no negotiation, and no option to pass the cost on to residents. For Hank, it meant that the same concrete they'd tried to erase was now being professionally replaced, paid for in full by the very organization that had targeted him. The new driveway came with reinforced sublayering and high-grade sealant, typically reserved for commercial installations. The city even added an inspection certificate, as a formality perhaps, but one Hank quietly appreciated. But there was something more important than the concrete. The HOA was also ordered to issue formal, written apologies to every affected homeowner, signed by the board president. Fines were to be immediately suspended, pending a comprehensive review of the HOA's enforcement policies, overseen directly by the city's zoning office. And as for the enforcers, they didn't just lose their positions. The man with the mirrored aviators and smug one-liners, the same one who'd spray-painted Hank's driveway without a word, was cited personally under local ordinances for vandalism of private property. He was fined, required to perform community service, and publicly reprimanded at the next HOA meeting. Residents watched, some with phones filming discreetly, as he scrubbed his own fluorescent initials off the side of a mailbox post with a toothbrush, under supervision. No one said much. They didn't have to. And then came the part Hank hadn't expected. He received a call from the City of Brookdale's Planning Commission, not just to thank him, but to ask for his help. They invited him to serve as an advisory consultant in reviewing and rewriting HOA compliance procedures for the entire district. His role would be voluntary, but his input would carry weight. He said, yes, of course, not for pride and not for revenge, but to make sure no other homeowner had to stand in their slippers watching strangers deface their property with a spray can and a power trip. On the first day of the committee meeting, Hank walked in with a fresh legal pad and a quiet smile. The system had tried to silence him. Now it had to listen.